Up ahead on Legislative Review. Banning card processing fees on service tips. Plus, a legislative push to boost post-secondary enrollment rates. That's coming right up on Legislative Review. Thank you for watching Legislative Review. I'm Angela Nolasco with today's top discussions in the state legislature.
Good morning. We are happy to welcome everyone to our first Labor and Commerce Committee of the 2025 session.
In the morning of Friday, January 17th, the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee heard a bill that, if passed, would ban credit and debit card transaction fees from being applied on the service tip of a bill's total amount. Also known as interchange fees, these are extra charges on top of the payment due for the use of electronic bank cards. Under federal law, when service tips are charged on a customer's credit card, the merchant is allowed to deduct that percentage of the fee from the employee's tip. Essentially, if you don't tip in cash and use your card to pay and tip your server, there's a charge to process that total amount. The restaurant is then allowed to deduct that charge from your server's tip. Interchange fees usually range from 1.5 to 3.5% of the total bill. Current Washington state laws do not address this deduction from an employee's tip.
Senate Bill 5070 concerning prohibiting fees on certain acts of commerce to protect tipped wages for workers while reducing the financial burden on employers.
Which brings us to Friday's public hearing on Senate Bill 5070, legislation aiming to ban interchange fees on tipped wages. Senator Rebecca Saldana of Seattle is the bill's prime sponsor.
Many small businesses in big cities are still recovering from the pandemic, as we are trying to address our behavioral health infrastructure and build places for people to come indoors, that continues to be an issue. I was looking for a way that would provide some relief to them, and in addition to making sure that as we find that relief, that it's not on that doesn't burden the actual workers doing the work, and making sure that for workers that have earned those tips, that they get the full amount of those tips.
Proponents of the bill say it would prohibit credit card companies from charging merchant fees on sales tax and tips and other charges. Eunice Have of Hospitality Labor Union Unite Here Local 8 said there have been several proposals in the past to separate credit card charges and service tips.
These proposals would have resulted in pay cuts for workers who already struggle to make ends meet as housing costs rise and inflation puts pressure on working people's ability to provide for their families. While this practice affects any worker who relies on tips as part of their income, for those with the lowest incomes who in our industry are disproportionately women and Black, Indigenous, people of color workers, this can make a difference between putting food on the table or paying an important bill at the end of the month.
Steve Rauschenberger of Electronic Payments Coalition testified to oppose the bill, saying it won't be easy to change a global payment system to accommodate a special circumstance for one state.
The current system we have is wonderful. You can swipe your card in Buenos Aires and pay for a dinner in less than 7 seconds. It's a wonderful system that can do anything that's mathematical. What it can't do is it's never been designed to look inside a shopping cart to decide what's taxable and what's not taxable, what's sales tax, what's in excise taxes, and what's the tip. So the system currently is blind. It only knows who you are, where you are, and how much you're transacting.
Testifying in support, restaurant worker Evan Gallo disagreed.
Credit cards are convenient, I get it, but I didn't choose for my employer to accept credit cards. As we're seeing, employers are now beginning to even move to fully cashless business models, which means that I am going to see a 3% tax on the majority of my income, even in spite of the higher minimum wage here. I have, over the past 3 years that I've been in the restaurant industry, been taxed at about 2 to 3%, depending on the job, of all of my tips, which is functionally, all of my credit card tips, which is functionally all of my tips, because I receive maybe one cash payment a month.
Brad Tower of Community Bankers of Washington told the committee how this bill could adversely affect how global and local banking systems are set up.
My fear is that the people who will be harmed by this are the local banks, local credit unions, and local merchants. And our local banks who serve local merchants are probably going to be the last ones to be considered as if the state adopts a policy that is going to affect worldwide commerce.
Should Senate Bill 5070 pass, a $1,000 fine per penalty would be applied.
Good morning, everybody.
From the Senate, we move to the House of Representatives, where the House Postsecondary Education and Workforce Committee convened for a public hearing the same morning. The legislation up for discussion, House Bill 1136, which proposes to repeal both FAFSA and WASFA, the federal and Washington state's financial aid programs, and establish a navigational support system called the Financial Aid Completion and Postsecondary Enrollment Program for high school students in every school district. This would create educational navigators, overseen by a group of people in community and technical colleges, public high schools, tribal organizations, and community-based schools. Navigators will be tasked to perform outreach and enrollment, acting as specialists who will work directly with high schools in each district. They would also engage with each school's counseling program and students' families to see where they can help, with the end goal of increasing FAFSA and WAFSA completion rates. Democratic Representative Mari Levitt of Lakewood sponsored the bill. She said it would help get post-secondary enrollment numbers up, which will eventually help with state workforce shortages and in turn boost Washington's economy.
Our enrollments in our post-secondary education institutions are not following track. We're having students leave the system from high school, not knowing what a pathway opportunities they have, not knowing how to apply to get funding, and resources are being left on the table federally. Having navigators in our school districts and available to assist students specifically for post-secondary attainment is really critical in order to get those numbers up and to get our trained workers out in the workforce and strengthening our economy in all areas of our state. This is not a replacement of counselors, and so I want to be very clear. Our K through 12 counselors are unique and different than a post-secondary education navigator.
She believes navigators will help expand opportunities to provide relief to counselors, but not replace them. The Foundation for Tacoma Students expressed support for the bill.
The cost of tuition is one of the top barriers that students will cite as to why they do not enroll in some form of post-secondary education. With this bill, you have the chance to complement those investments with important student outreach and navigational support interventions to help get those funds into the pockets of more students.
The Washington State Building and Construction Trades Council shared their recommendations to the bill.
We are asking for a revision to ensure we are messaging to Washingtonians that apprenticeship is post-secondary education. If the intent is to exclude apprenticeship, we request the post-secondary education term be replaced with the term college. However, if the intent is to include apprenticeship, we are open to discussing how we can accomplish this.
No one testified against House Bill 1136. To watch all the hearings covered in this episode, as well as gavel-to-gavel coverage of the 2025 legislative session, visit our website at tvw.org. And that's a wrap for this episode of Legislative Review. Join us nightly at 8 and 11 to keep up with what's happening in the legislature.